The sixth interruption slices through the chamber like a blade. Stephen Miller's voice carries the smugness of a man who has spent years mistaking volume for power. He leans forward, words tumbling out rapid and dismissive, determined to drown out the woman across from him. His tone is overbearing, his manner sharp, and for a moment it feels less like a debate than a staged ambush. All eyes shift to Jasmine Crockett. She does not flinch. Her gaze is steady, her lips pressed into the kind of restrained composure that tells you she has endured far worse than this man's theatrics. Silence follows each jab, not because Miller commands respect, but because the room waits, everyone sensing something is about to snap. Crockett inhales slowly, almost theatrically. Her hands remain still, her body language calm, yet there's a fire rising behind her eyes. The chamber tightens with suspense. Each interruption had been meant to weaken her resolve, to corner her into silence. But what Miller doesn't know is that with every attempt, he has only sharpened her reply. The chamber was on edge, but no one expected what her seventh response would do. The hearing itself was never supposed to be about Stephen Miller. Officially, the session centered on immigration policy, accountability, and the human impact of laws written far from the lives they govern. But Miller saw it as an opportunity to reassert himself, a chance to remind the cameras and the world that his voice still carried weight. He came armed with talking points sharpened like daggers, determined to dominate the stage. For years, Miller had perfected the art of speaking over others, of cutting them off before their words could land. It was a tactic born from privilege and polished in the corridors of unchecked power. To him, interruptions weren't rudeness, they were strategy. By seizing control of the air, he seized control of the narrative. And in this room, he believed he could do the same to Jasmine Crockett. But Crockett was not the typical target of his aggression. She was not a lobbyist paid to bite her tongue, nor a timid witness unsure of her footing. She was a congresswoman who had built her career standing her ground against louder, richer, more entitled men than him. Her calm presence wasn't passivity. It was poise, sharpened into armor. The imbalance could not be more striking. Miller, the insider who once drafted policies from the shadows of the White House, now straining for relevance. Crockett, the freshman lawmaker with roots in struggle and service, bringing authenticity that no interruption could erase. Their clash was more than personal, it was emblematic. On one side, the machinery of silencing. On the other, the resilience of a woman who refused to be muted. Every interruption deepened the stakes. Each time Miller spoke over her, the symbolism grew heavier. A powerful man desperate to cling to control versus a determined woman embodying the dignity of those too often ignored. It was not just about policy anymore. It was about whether truth could survive the arrogance of interruption. Miller leaned harder into his tactics, certain he was winning ground. But what he didn't realize, what no one in that chamber fully understood yet, was that with each desperate cutoff, he was cornering himself. But Miller had no idea he was setting himself up for humiliation. To understand why Stephen Miller barged into that chamber with the arrogance of a man who believed interruptions equaled dominance, you have to rewind the tape on his career. Miller wasn't just another talking head. He was the architect of some of the most divisive, hardline policies of the Trump era. The Muslim ban, family separations at the border, the attempt to end DACA, all carried his fingerprints. He styled himself as the guardian of an America defined by exclusion, a nation gated off to those who didn't look, pray, or speak like him. From the start, Miller learned to wield hostility as a weapon. In college, he built his reputation on fiery speeches railing against multiculturalism and immigration. He wasn't interested in debate. He thrived on provocation. By the time he entered Washington, he had refined that hostility into a political identity. Always interrupting, always sneering, always reaching for a soundbite designed to shock. It wasn't intelligence that elevated him. It was the sheer audacity of never letting anyone else finish a sentence. And yet, beneath that bravado lay a striking hypocrisy. Miller owed his rise to the very freedoms he so often tried to curtail. A child of immigrant grandparents, he benefited from the same system he later sought to barricade. He preached about law and order, while excusing chaos when it came from his own political allies. He lectured others on loyalty, but was quick to betray when expedient. This pattern of entitlement wasn't incidental. It was the foundation of his career. Over time, intimidation became his signature move. Whether in press briefings, policy meetings, or media appearances, Miller rarely tried to persuade. He sought to overwhelm. He interrupted, he hectored, he scowled. For years, this style worked. Colleagues were too wary, journalists too bound by decorum, and opponents too blindsided to strike back effectively. The interruptions became predictable, but because they often went unchallenged, Miller mistook predictability for power. Contrast that history with the setting of this hearing. Here was Miller, long accustomed to controlling the narrative, facing someone who refused to bend. He reached for the same old tactics, certain they would work. But what happens when your only weapon is bluster, and the person across from you has built a life out of enduring worse storms? His reliance on intimidation was no longer a strategy, it was a liability. And make no mistake, Miller carried himself with entitlement even as the political landscape shifted beneath him. Out of office, without the shield of presidential authority, he was just another man raising his voice in a chamber that demanded substance. Yet he acted as if his words carried the inevitability of law, as if volume could substitute for legitimacy. That disconnect, the gap between his self-image and his dwindling influence, was on full display. What Miller underestimated was the moment itself. This wasn't a White House briefing where reporters could be ignored. This wasn't a private strategy session where dissent could be quashed. This was a public forum, and every interruption revealed not strength, but desperation. Viewers at home could see the pattern. The same cutting off, the same arrogance, the same hollow performance. The act had worn thin. Still, Miller pressed forward, interrupting again and again, as though repetition could restore the power he once commanded. But for all his experience bulldozing over voices, he had never truly faced someone like Jasmine Crockett, a woman whose very presence defied the silencing he depended on. Her steadiness was his undoing. This was not his first attempt to bulldoze, but it might be his last unchallenged one. Jasmine Crockett did not walk into Congress by accident. Her journey began in the soil of Texas, a place where resilience isn't optional. It's a way of life. Born into a family that valued hard work over handouts, she grew up surrounded by the daily realities of struggle and perseverance. There were no gilded hallways to carry her forward, no family name to open doors. What she had instead was grit, sharpened early, and a determination that only grows in the face of obstacles. Her path to law was not a straight shot. Like many first-generation professionals, she faced the weight of doubt at every turn. Doubters who questioned whether a black woman from Texas could make it in a profession dominated by privilege. Professors who underestimated her, peers who overlooked her brilliance until it was undeniable. She didn't coast into courtrooms. She fought her way in, case by case, client by client. As a civil rights and criminal defense attorney, she saw firsthand the machinery of injustice grind down the vulnerable. Day after day, she stood between ordinary people and a system designed to break them. Every late-night strategy session, every battle for a client's dignity, forged her into something sharper than a politician, into an advocate who understood that law without justice was nothing more than paperwork. Those years shaped her composure. They taught her when to stay silent, when to press, when to unleash the full weight of her voice. They taught her to endure the interruptions of judges, the sneers of opposing counsel, the dismissals of those who assumed her presence was temporary. What Stephen Miller mistook for passivity in that chamber was actually training, decades of learning how to wait, how to hold fire until the precise moment when words land with undeniable force. Her leap into public service was not born of ambition alone. It was born of necessity. She watched the people she represented suffer under laws written without their voices. She saw communities, immigrant, black, working class, treated as bargaining chips in someone else's political theater. Running for office was not about prestige. It was about bringing those silent stories into the halls where decisions were made. And when she won, she carried those voices with her every day into every room. This underdog arc gave Crockett a credibility Miller could never buy. She wasn't speaking from policy paper. She was speaking from lived experience. When she challenged arrogance, she did so with the weight of entire communities behind her. And when she carried herself with poise under fire, it wasn't because she lacked passion. It was because she had learned that passion, delivered with precision, could cut deeper than any interruption. So, as she sat across from Stephen Miller, her eyes steady and her lips pressed into controlled resolve, she was not merely enduring. She was calculating. She had faced louder men, harsher odds, and higher stakes than this moment. The chamber may have seen a clash of personalities. But for Crockett, it was the latest battle in a lifetime of standing firm when others tried to push her aside. It was this fire, forged long before Miller ever spoke her name, that armed her for the moment to come, be why the time Stephen Miller cut her off for the fourth time. The room was already restless. Staffers shifted in their seats. Reporters glanced at one another with raised brows, and even seasoned lawmakers adjusted their posture as if to silently ask, "Is this man serious?" But Miller pressed forward, his voice tightening with each interjection, convinced that sheer repetition could smother Jasmine Crockett's words. The fifth interruption landed with the smugness of someone who believed domination was inevitable. He leaned on talking points he'd rehearsed 1,000 times before, hammering them out in a rhythm meant to overwhelm. Still, Crockett didn't flinch. She sat upright, her hands clasped, her expression a mask of discipline. The stillness wasn't surrender. It was defiance wrapped in composure. When the sixth interruption came, it was almost farcical. Miller surged over her voice, cutting mid-sentence, as though his volume alone could erase her from the record. The chamber thickened with discomfort. Aides shuffled papers just to break the tension, and one senator shifted heavily in his chair, casting Miller a glance that said more than words ever could. Yet Crockett held her ground, absorbing the disrespect without a single tremor. Every viewer could feel the imbalance. One man unraveling in arrogance, one woman embodying restraint. Each interruption became a metaphor, every attempt to silence her transforming into a public indictment of his own insecurity. What Miller thought was control revealed itself as desperation. The audience, inside the chamber and beyond it, could sense the balance tipping, and in the silence that followed his sixth attempt, a new energy rippled through the room. Crockett inhaled, eyes steady, her patience stretched to the breaking point but not broken. The weight of anticipation pressed on every corner of the chamber, as if everyone knew the air itself was about to shift. And then came interruption number 7, the one that backfired spectacularly. The seventh interruption came like all the others, sudden, smug, and cutting across Jasmine Crockett's sentence as if her words were disposable. Miller's voice boomed over hers, desperate to drown her out one more time. But this time, Crockett didn't let it slide. She leaned forward, eyes locked on him, and allowed a brief, loaded pause to settle over the chamber. For the first time that day, silence didn't belong to Miller. It belonged to her. That pause was electric. Reporters froze mid-keystroke, their fingers hovering over laptops. A senator across the room raised his eyebrows and leaned back, as though bracing for impact. Crockett inhaled slowly, then spoke with a calm that sliced sharper than any shout. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice steady but edged with steel, "if you believed interruptions were the same as arguments, you might have convinced yourself you've been winning. But after 6 attempts, all you've really proven is how terrified you are of hearing a black woman finish her thought." The words landed with surgical precision. Gasps scattered across the chamber, muffled but unmistakable. Miller blinked, his mouth parting slightly, the smug rhythm of his interruptions suddenly broken. For a man who thrived on performance, he looked for once like someone caught without a script. Crockett didn't press further at first. She let the silence hang, let the weight of her words expand until every corner of the room carried them. Miller fumbled for a response, but his hesitation betrayed him. The man who had interrupted 6 times without hesitation now struggled to find footing. And then she continued, her tone unwavering. You can raise your voice, you can try to talk over me, but that doesn't erase the truth. And the truth is simple. Interruption isn't strength. It's weakness dressed up as arrogance. It was a mic drop line, the kind of retort that doesn't just win an exchange, but defines it. Across the country, viewers watching live were already reacting, tweets firing off, memes being crafted in real time. One read, 6 interruptions. One knockout. Another captioned a freeze frame of Miller's stunned face. When the homework finally claps back. Inside the chamber, the ripple effect was immediate. Some staffers stifled smiles. Others lowered their heads to hide them. One lawmaker gave a barely perceptible nod of approval. Even those who had no allegiance to Crockett could feel the tide turn. Miller's dominance had evaporated, replaced with the unmistakable sense that he had been cornered by his own tactics. The brilliance of Crockett's line wasn't just in its sting, it was in its restraint. She hadn't shouted, hadn't matched arrogance with arrogance. She had wielded dignity like a weapon, turning Miller's aggression against him. Every interruption he thought was silencing her had instead been sharpening the blade she finally unsheathed. Miller tried to recover, fumbling through a rebuttal, but his words stumbled. The rhythm of control he relied on had been broken. Each attempt at regaining ground only drew more attention to the moment he had already lost. His interruptions now sounded less like power and more like panic. Meanwhile, Crockett leaned back, her expression serene, as though to signal she had no need to embellish what had already been said. The chamber, once tense with imbalance, now vibrated with a new energy, one where silence worked against Miller, not her. The image of that moment spread beyond the room. On social media, hashtags trended instantly. Hashtag 7th line, hashtag Crockett versus Miller, hashtag dignity wins. Commentators clipped the exchange before the hearing even ended, labeling it the takedown of the year. It wasn't just a political clash anymore. It was cultural theater, a showdown that symbolized resilience over arrogance. And while the internet roared, Crockett sat quietly, composed, as if she had merely stated a fact rather than delivered the most devastating blow of the session. That was the power of her response. It didn't look rehearsed. It didn't sound desperate. It felt inevitable. This wasn't just a comeback. It was dignity weaponized. And with a single, precise line, Jasmine Crockett transformed 6 interruptions into the setup for a takedown that would echo far beyond the chamber walls. The moment Jasmine Crockett delivered her 7th line, the chamber felt it, but the real explosion happened outside its walls. Within minutes, the clip was circulating across social media, igniting timelines like a spark to dry brush. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Every platform became a stage replaying her words, her poise, and Stephen Miller's stunned silence. Hashtags began trending almost instantly. Hashtag 7th line, hashtag Crockett mic drop, hashtag dignity wins. Users flooded the feeds with their own interpretations. Some paired Crockett's calm takedown with slow-motion replays set to triumphant music. Others froze the moment Miller's smirk faltered, captioning it with lines like, "When arrogance meets its match." By the end of the day, Crockett's name had surged into the top trending topics nationwide. What made the reaction striking was its diversity. Progressive activists applauded her as a champion of resilience. Immigrant families posted heartfelt tributes, saying her words felt like vindication against years of being talked over or dismissed. Even some political moderates, rarely eager to praise anyone in such polarized times, acknowledged her composure as a rare display of strength without bluster. Meanwhile, the mockery directed at Miller was relentless. Late-night comedians quickly wove the exchange into their monologues, playing the clip to roars of laughter. One joked, Interrupting 6 times just to get knocked out by the 7th? That's not strategy, that's masochism. Memes multiplied by the hour. Miller depicted as a malfunctioning robot short-circuiting. Captions reading error. Cannot process dignity. Analysts and commentators weighed in, dissecting not just the politics, but the symbolism. This wasn't only about policy, one journalist remarked on a primetime panel. It was about power. Who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, and what happens when someone refuses to be silenced. Celebrities added their voices too. Actors, musicians, and athletes reposted the clip, each framing Crockett's response as a model of grace under fire. One pop star wrote, "That's how you handle a bully. Calm, sharp, unshakable." Inside Washington, whispers circulated. Some insiders admitted privately that Miller had overplayed his hand. Others warned that Crockett had just raised her national profile in a single stroke. For her supporters, it felt less like a win in a hearing and more like a cultural moment, proof that composure could triumph over arrogance in an age of noise. The ripple effect was undeniable. Students debated it in classrooms. Families shared it at dinner tables. Activists clipped it into motivational reels. Crockett's line became more than a political soundbite. It became a symbol of endurance, a reminder that sometimes the sharpest power is the refusal to break. But what truly made this moment historic wasn't the applause. It was the lesson. In the days that followed, as clips of the exchange continued to ricochet across the internet, Jasmine Crockett was asked repeatedly what had gone through her mind at that pivotal moment. Her response was simple, almost understated. "I've been interrupted my whole life. That doesn't mean I stopped speaking." With that clarity, she reframed what had seemed like a heated spar into something larger, a universal truth that stretched beyond politics. Arrogance will always underestimate resilience. And when it does, resilience wins. For every interruption Miller thought would bury her voice, Crockett revealed the opposite. That dignity is a force more powerful than noise. She had not shouted. She had not matched insult for insult. Instead, she wielded composure as her shield and precision as her sword. In doing so, she proved that truth doesn't need theatrics to land. It only needs courage to be spoken without fear. Her presence in that chamber reminded viewers everywhere that silence is not the same as defeat. Sometimes, silence is preparation. Sometimes, waiting is strategy. And when the moment finally arrives, one line, delivered with calm certainty, can eclipse 1,000 interruptions. Miller believed his interruptions gave him control. What they really gave Crockett was the perfect stage to show that control belongs to those who cannot be rattled. The lesson rippled far beyond partisan lines. For immigrants who had been told to go back, for women talked over in boardrooms, for students ignored in classrooms, for workers dismissed at their jobs, the image of Crockett holding her ground resonated like a promise. It said, "Your voice matters, even when others try to cut it short. Your dignity is stronger than their arrogance. Your truth is louder than their noise." And this was the crescendo, the moral clarity that made the moment unforgettable. Truth is greater than power. Composure is greater than chaos. The chamber that day became more than a stage for political theater. It became a mirror reflecting a struggle as old as democracy itself. Whether bullying can silence justice, or whether justice will always find a way to speak. Crockett showed that the answer is the latter. Her 7th line was not just a takedown, it was an invitation. An invitation for every person who has ever been interrupted, dismissed, or mocked to remember that their patience and persistence are not weaknesses. They're their greatest strengths. And so, what began as one man's arrogance ended as a reminder to millions. Dignity doesn't just endure, it triumphs. Stephen Miller tried 6 times to silence Jasmine Crockett. But with her 7th line, she silenced him forever. What unfolded wasn't just political drama. It was proof that arrogance falls and dignity rises. In that chamber, Crockett didn't just win an argument. She embodied the resilience every silenced voice longs to see. And now the question is simple. Will we let her stand alone, or will we amplify her message? Subscribe, share, and join a movement that refuses to stay silent when arrogance tries to crush truth.